Capcom just released a bunch of new information for Resident Evil Requiem thanks to a number of key interviews conducted during Gamescom, revealing big aspects about the game, from the game's horror elements to the title's story and how it connects to the other Resident Evil games, to other aspects like returning to Raccoon City, PS5 Pro performance, the level of action, and much, much more. No leaks here, my friends. This is stuff coming straight from Capcom themselves, so if you can't wait for Resident Evil Requiem early next year, boulder punch that like button and participate in my giveaway of this year's hottest survival horror title, Silent Hill F. Finish off your summer with some tasty energy drinks by using my affiliate code on your next Gamer Supps order and save 10%. Trust me, these drinks are worth every penny. Alright, let's first talk about the game's horror elements. I mean, this is Resident Evil after all, as Capcom is determined to make this Resident Evil game absolutely terrifying and thrilling, while giving players multiple ways to experience the unnerving horrors ahead. A lot of people are looking at the gameplay demo of Resident Evil 9 and attributing its likeness very closely to Resident Evil 7, with the persistent Jack Baker's constant threat in the early moments of that game being quite reminiscent of what is colloquially known as Big Mama, the hag lady creature stalking Grace in Resident Evil 9. Well, the director of RE7, Koshi Nakanishi, is also directing Resident Evil 9, and attributes the horror of this upcoming game to be very similar to that of RE7, which is often considered to be the scariest game in the entire franchise. This time around, however, Nakanishi is committed to ensuring that those who thought RE7 was too scary can also enjoy RE9 more. And that's thanks to the game also offering a compelling third-person mode on top of its first-person offering. In an interview with Games Radar, Nakanishi reflected on Resident Evil 7's first-person perspective with, "Looking back at Resident Evil 7's first-person perspective, I implemented that as a way to make it more immersive and more scary than ever before, which I think most media and players agreed it was an incredibly scary game, but it was possibly too scary." In developing a Resident Evil 9, Nakanishi developed the title with both first and third-person perspectives in mind to ensure that those who found the first-person gameplay to be too frightening would be able to switch over to a third-person mode. So, if you started the game off in first-person perspective and you're finding it's too much, then third-person is almost a way to step slightly back from that level of horror and make it slightly easier to deal with by having the character on screen as a kind of avatar of yourself, said Nakanishi. In an interview with Game Informer, Nakanishi addressed how the level of horror measures up when compared to Resident Evil 7, stating that while he's not aiming to create the scariest Resident Evil game yet in Resident Evil 9, that it's more about more dramatic releases of tension and catharsis and surviving what's ahead of you, adding, quote, "But it's certainly up there in terms of how scary Requiem is," end quote. To add, Nakanishi confirmed that the demo featuring Old Mama stalking Grace happens early in the game, stating, quote, "If you think this is scary," of course referring to the demo, "you haven't seen anything yet." Suffice it to say, while we obviously don't know how scary this game will be when viewed next to its counterparts, Capcom is making sure that Requiem maintains a level of fear throughout while also tailoring it to a wider audience by including both third and first-person perspectives. While we only really have the demo to go on at the moment, I've been really digging what we've been shown so far, even though the stalker enemies and this type of gameplay is nothing new that we've seen before from the series. Even still, the tension created throughout the environment and design of Old Mama is undoubtedly creepy AF, so if Capcom is touting that we ain't seen nothing yet, I can't wait to see what's in store for us, especially since we're returning to Raccoon City here. Now switching gears and looking at how Resident Evil 9 fits together with the rest of the series, Nakanishi told Game Informer that he doesn't see Resident Evil 9 as part of a trilogy with Resident Evil 7 and 8, and that those two games that precede Resident Evil 9 act more as a duology with Ethan Winter's saga. If I had to compare Requiem to past titles, Nakanishi told Games Radar, it's more along the lines of Resident Evil 7 or the Resident Evil 2 remake, going further to state that exploration, backtracking, puzzle solving, and resource management, among other things, is key to the RE9 experience. When speaking of the game's action, Nakanishi, in the same interview with Games Radar, stated that Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil Village are, quote, more on the action side of the series, end quote. implying that the aforementioned Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 7, both games where survival horror was much more prevalent, are games that are more closely linked to Resident Evil 9 on a gameplay level. So this will likely be music to your ears if you enjoyed the more tense, survival horror-driven Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 7 games, as opposed to the more action-oriented Resident Evil titles, as while RE9 will, of course, contain action, Nakanishi and his team are deliberately aiming to bring the series closer back to its survival horror roots with this latest Resident Evil title. Nakanishi also teased that there's, quote, a new system that I can't get into yet, end quote, hinting that the moments of intense horror and suspense, contrasted with eerie calmness, are more dramatic than ever before, equating the experience as a, quote, complete roller coaster ride between the different aspects of the series, and I'm very excited for people to eventually understand what I mean by that. He also comically added, "We're definitely going to fuck around with your emotions a lot with this one." Yeah, I can't wait either. Okay, we've talked horror elements, gameplay similarities, and comparisons to previous games in the series, but let's look at how this game's decision to return to Raccoon City celebrates the 30th anniversary of Resident Evil, while also paving a way forward in future entries. In an interview with IGN, director Koshi Nakanishi and producer Masato Kumazawa discussed that while returning to Raccoon City does serve as an iconic and haunting place to return to that celebrates the series, Requiem isn't a game that is entirely focused on looking back. It's coming out on the 30th anniversary, but it wasn't planned that way, remarked producer Kumazawa. It just ended up being that the development was finished and the game was ready to release in 2026, which is the 30th anniversary. It wasn't built to be an anniversary title that is only backward facing, so there's a lot more to the game than just the series' legacy. Kumazawa went further, stating, "And we're back in Raccoon City, but that's not the only location in the game." While not going any further to suggest which other areas the game may take us to, we know that the areas surrounding Raccoon City are very much part of the game, including locations like the Wrenwood Hotel and other areas on the outskirts of Raccoon City. Now, when just thinking of Raccoon City, thinking of classic characters like Leon S. Kennedy, Jill Valentine, and others is inevitable. So while Capcom isn't spilling the beans if older legacy characters will be present in Resident Evil 9, Nakanishi told IGN, "It's tough to answer without getting into too much that we're not ready to talk about yet." Now, interpret that how you'd like, but I mean, come on. We're likely to get some sort of appearance from maybe one of these legacy characters, right? Lots of leaks out there suggest that Leon will play a major role here, but we'll have to see on that one. One character that has been confirmed to be not present in Resident Evil 9 is none other than Chris Redfield, a character who appeared briefly in both Resident Evil 7 and 8, with Nakanishi telling Games Radar, "Rest assured, I'm sure Chris is out in action somewhere in the world, but for now, we're not really looking at him." With that said, which legacy characters are you hoping or expecting to see in Resident Evil 9? Will we be able to play as other characters aside from just Grace? I'm inclined to think so, as a number of mainline Resident Evil games typically feature segments starring other characters, but yeah, I can't wait to find out. Speaking of characters, we can't not talk about Grace Ashcroft, this title's protagonist. As an investigative reporter, Grace is said to be incredibly vulnerable and helpless at the start of the game, Kumazawa told Games Radar. But she develops confidence throughout the title and eventually becomes a competent survivalist in due time. She hasn't got any weapons on her, and she's completely unaccustomed to being thrown into this kind of intense situation, said Nakanishi. But she goes on a journey, and you'll go with her on it too. She will grow throughout the game and gradually become more competent and capable, and overcome her fear somewhat. Eventually, she'll be able to grab guns and shoot back at the horrors that await her. So she doesn't stay in this completely terrified, helpless state throughout the whole game. Alright. That brings us to our final bit of information, which is the performance on the PS5 Pro console. While the PS5 Pro is obviously not what the base PS5 model nor the Xbox consoles are, we can get some sort of idea how these older machines may run the game based off how the PS5 Pro runs the game. According to Digital Foundry, the demo at Gamescom on the PS5 Pro ran the game at a steady 60 frames per second, with full ray tracing features targeting a dynamic 4K resolution, but mostly hovered around 1080p. Seeing as this is for the PS5 Pro, we're likely to expect both quality and performance modes to hit the base models of the Xbox and PS5 versions, just like the past games have featured. And that's about it as far as all the new information we got from the recent interviews and statements from Capcom. This game looks and sounds incredibly ambitious, and so much fun. But let me know down in the comments what your thoughts are on all this new Resident Evil 9 news. And come find me over here in this video as we dive deep into the scariest games of Resident Evil, ranked from least scary to the absolute scariest. Got nothing else for ya. I look forward to seeing you all real soon in the next one.